Antonio Gramsci was an Italian communist in the 30s. The crisis consists precisely in the fact that the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And this prompted a question to me: why can't the new be born when we so deeply, desperately, madly need the new and we need change? And the reason, or one of the reasons I came up with, was the death of different narratives. We've already slightly mentioned this at tables. The 1980s didn't see the end of history that some people proclaimed, but it did see the end of any alternative narratives. Since the 1980s, there has only been one single narrative imposed on the world, and that's the narrative of economic fundamentalism, financial capitalism, and economic monetarism. So after millennia of development, of human development, Homo sapiens in 40 years has been reduced to Homo economicus, which is a very diminished view of what it means to be human. So, for the advantage of the few and not the many, we are suffocating the human spirit, and we are suffocating the human imagination and human creativity. And yet, and we're seeing this in all the presentations, under the radar screen, there is so much human creativity, so many bottom-up social and cultural experiments worldwide. However, and this is the big however, because they don't fit into the present overarching narrative, they lose legitimacy, and they're emptied of meaning, and therefore they so often become invisible. So we have this situation where there's loads of stuff happening, but their sense of meaning is floating because the overarching narrative gives them no legitimacy. But here's the good news. Like all stories, the present economic one is not a truth, but an invention. All stories, all narratives, all worldviews, they come and they go. It comes, and when it is no longer useful, it goes, and it is no longer useful. So, Mr. Gramsci, the old is dying. We are going from a world of straight lines, the linearity of cause and effect, of reason, of economics, of logic and order, to a complex and constantly evolving and emergent world of connected networks. I'm known as the pyramid to pancake lazy. Silly little framework, but makes the point. To a complex and constantly evolving and emergent world of connected networks and systems. And a world, and this is the scary bit, a world that is and always will be increasingly out of control. Now, this new reality is not governable through simplistic, bureaucratic, technocratic, top-down command and control organisations. Organisations that promote me, ego, competition, winners and losers, and lots of testosterone, ladies. The ladies laugh, the men look around. Instead, do I have enough testosterone? Instead, thank you. Instead, the new complexity and connectedness requires a totally different way of being in the world. It requires decentralization and distribution of power and creativity. The things that we've been hearing in virtually all of the presentations. That's the kind of subtext. To be able to spread creativity, we will only deal with this complex, diverse, out-of-control world if we are able to distribute and decentralize creativity, capacity and power through the system in order to allow everybody to continuously participate in processes of learning and of innovation based on collaboration and on cooperation. So we can no longer be a world of I and me. We must be a world of we and us. We can no longer think of a world of doing things to people or even for people, but we have to think of a world, in order to manage this complexity, of doing things with people and even by people themselves. And what's been encouraging is that we know that underneath the radar, lots of this is happening. But here's the really good news. Because more people doing more things together creates more. And therefore, the potential for the future is one not based on the meanness of scarcity, which actually we don't have scarcity, we just have a few people owning too much, which to me is plunder, not scarcity. So more people doing more together creates more, which is a potential of the future, not of scarcity, but actually of abundance. And so, as we go from the centralised, central command and control, to the decentralised, to ultimately the totally chaotic, connected, distributed complexity of the future, it is now time, a massive opportunity, but also a big challenge, to decide the kind of not European society, but the kind of society that we want. And this is not the work of economics. This is certainly not the work of economics. This is the work of culture. Not culture in terms of entertainment and business, but the big culture of the arts and the humanities, and the small, more intimate culture of everyday creation of values and behaviours, etc. So, I've talked of the death of narrative, but I've also talked of hope, of the many stories that we now need to create a new narrative to legitimise and then let them go. We don't need to connect all these things together. We need a meta-narrative that legitimises them, makes them visible, and starts to tell us this is the new world that we are entering. And it's a democratised, empowered one. And Dougal is now going to show us some examples of that. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jo. 6 years ago, I left a job career as a BBC journalist. I wanted to find a better way of telling stories. I wanted to be faithful to culture in its broadest sense, the structures, the patterns of meaning that we make or find in the world. And working in newsrooms, too often I felt like I was taking, extracting, exploiting the meaningful, the particular, the painful, as a raw material for an industrial process. So I threw myself into the practice of networked culture, creating a series of projects and organisations which are accommodated to this new world which is struggling to be born. Projects like the Dark Mountain Project, which challenges us to face the frightening and unmanageable depth of the crises that we're in, and also to look to the roots of those crises in the stories that we've been telling ourselves for generations as societies. Organisations like Spacemakers, which brings people together to tell stories, to tell new stories in the places where they live, with practical results. 20 empty shops in an indoor market in Brixton became a rolling festival of temporary, creative and community projects, artists, makers, new independent local businesses. And at the end of a year that we were working there, that market was fully occupied for the first time since 1979. So what have I learned from this? The first thing is stories matter more in a world of networks. It's less about trying to get access to those bottlenecks through which you can communicate and reach people. It's more about catching people's imaginations, so they go away and talk about something and it spreads like a rumour. That's what happened with Brixton Village. That's why that project succeeded. The second thing that flows on from that is I think we're seeing a new cultural mode by which innovation scales. This is a hexayet. It's an open source shelter design. It's 12 boards, 6 of them make the walls, the other 6 cut in half make the roof. It's such a simple design that you can spread it by word of mouth. It was invented as a refugee shelter, but it's spread in some unexpected directions. This is an aerial photograph of the Burning Man Festival. Every red dot on there is a hexayet that's been identified. There's over 500 of them. Here are some more hexayets at the Pentagon, in Haiti, in Sri Lanka, at arts festivals in Helsinki and Berlin. There's some there that are here in Brussels. What you're looking at is an innovation which is spreading in a new way. It's scaling, but it's not growing the way that a business or an NGO would expand. It's spreading like a rumour or a story. Culture is becoming more important to the way that innovation scales. Finally, I think there's a lesson here for how we face the crisis that we're in. That when economies break down, people don't just lose their way of making a living, they also lose their sense of purpose and direction, the sense of meaning. Right now in Europe, we're facing a crisis which is too big for the kinds of economic regeneration that we've been used to. And I think that in many ways the best hope that we have is actually for an intervention at that level of meaning. We all know that it's possible to go from earning more to earning less, and so long as your basic needs are met, for your life to become more meaningful. It often happens when we change careers. But in the years ahead, as children continue to grow up poorer than their parents in many parts of Europe, I think the challenge and the thing that culture can bring is the question of whether, nonetheless, we can find new possibilities for purpose and direction together.